Today and tomorrow, I'm going to be talking a lot about nonviolent resistance strategies. In particular, I'm going to be going over concepts and skills that were covered in the nonviolent resistance boot camp that I went to over the weekend with hundreds of other Oregonians. If you're watching this over on YouTube, in the video description, I will have links to resources. I also want to point out here, if you are watching any of this series of videos and you're like, I really learned something, I really got something out of this, I really encourage you to go to the video description and look for the Act Blue donation button. I guess it will be a link. Look for that link and consider throwing $5 or $10 at it. So the event that I went to was put on by volunteers. We were volunteering and we had a grant from Indivisible. And then people were asked to consider donating for the weekend, but it didn't cover all of the costs. So what we're ending up with is the volunteer organizers having to pay out of pocket to cover the difference for all of the materials and renting the convention space. So please understand the skills and strategies I'm going to discuss over the next couple of days. I learned from the experts who are now having to foot some of the bill. So if what you're learning here is valuable to you, please consider throwing $5 or $10 at the Act Blue link. One of the things that's really important when we're doing community organizing is that we understand that we don't come to these spaces necessarily having a shared vocabulary. And that can cause a lot of confusion, right? Like some of us come from environmental activism or food justice activism. Some of us come from the labor movement. Some folks come from anti-war protesting, AIDS activism. We have different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, and that means that we don't always have a shared vocabulary. And when we try to use words and we have different understandings of those words, it can often cause conflict and confusion. So I want to define a couple of terms here before we get started. And I think, especially when we're talking about nonviolence, there is a lot of misunderstanding. I notice that I see people in my comments, especially on Facebook, who misunderstand me because I have failed to adequately define the terms. So I want to do that now. So number one, let's define nonviolence. So nonviolence is the abstention from violence. You are choosing neither to initiate with violence nor retaliate with violence. And that can be based out of your moral, religious, ethical principles, an overarching philosophy. It can also be a specific strategic choice. Nonviolence is not passive, and nonviolence is not the same thing as peaceful. In fact, as we're going to learn, nonviolent tactics that we use are very much disruptive, do not guarantee a peaceful interaction between you and law enforcement. In fact, you can pretty much guarantee in the United States in 2025, especially if you are engaging with the American Gestapo known as ICE, that if you are engaging in nonviolence, law enforcement will still be violent toward you. And in fact, they may intentionally enact violence and escalate that violence in an attempt to get you to break your nonviolent discipline. So nonviolence is a behavior where we are choosing neither to initiate nor to retaliate with violence. Now let's define the term nonviolent direct action. Nonviolent direct action is a technique that you use during protest, resistance work, or interventions where you decline to use physical violence. This means you can conduct acts of omission, right? I do not comply, right? Fuck you, make me. In these acts of omission, you can either be refusing to engage in expected behavior, or you can be refusing to comply with the law, refusing to perform behaviors that are required by law or law enforcement. Nonviolent direct action can also be acts of commission. That is, you are consciously choosing to perform nonviolent acts that are forbidden by law or by regulation or by custom. Nonviolent direct action is often a combination of both acts of omission and acts of commission. There are three main groups of these kinds of nonviolent actions: nonviolent protest and persuasion, non-cooperation, and nonviolent intervention. And I'll get into those in subsequent videos. The third term I want to define here is civil disobedience. Not all acts of nonviolent resistance are civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a deliberate, nonviolent violation of laws, decrees, regulations, ordinances, military or police commands, or other lawful orders. These are usually laws that are regarded as inherently immoral, unjust, or tyrannical. Sometimes, however, laws of a largely regulatory or morally neutral character may be disobeyed as a symbol of opposition to wider policies of the government that are tyrannical and unjust. Now, the boot camp that we attended was obviously strictly secular, but there are a number of religious faith practices that have a strong commitment to nonviolent direct action. There are so many justice movements throughout history. Obviously, the American Civil Rights Movement is just one example that are very much rooted in a faith practice. Right, for a lot of people of faith, we see that nonviolent resistance is a moral imperative. It is their faith in action. This is why I'm always advocating for our clergy and for people of faith to be at the forefront of this movement. And in, right, like a ecumenical way. It is not something that is confined to one particular faith practice, and it is a shared value that can bridge different religions and also be a bridge between people of faith and secular activists. In the next video, I'm going to get into the 4 core principles of nonviolent resistance, but it's important to understand as we are going into all of this, not only do we need to have these shared definitions so we understand what we're all talking about, we have to have a shared commitment to safety. I have so much deep respect for the organizers of the event this weekend because safety for all participants was the highest priority. Nonviolent direct action depends on a commitment to keeping the people involved as safe as possible. A key component of keeping us safe, right? Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. A key component of that is preparation in advance. That includes things like training seminars, like the ones that I went to, equipping people with knowledge and skills ahead of time. I am very much somebody who loves planning and preparation. I want to go into things with informed consent and enough knowledge to be able to navigate the situation that I have stepped into. And let's be clear here, nonviolent resistance, that is a voluntary choice. That is me choosing to step into a situation and engage in certain behaviors. It is not the same thing as needing to engage in self-defense, right? I know I said this in my last video on the subject, but we've got to constantly remember that when we are talking about nonviolent direct action, these are things we are willingly choosing to do. That is not the same thing as marginalized communities feeling being put in a position where they have to engage in self-defense against violence that the government is enacting against them. They're not the same thing. Because we are choosing to step into nonviolent direct action, that means we have to prepare ahead of time. That means the more planning we can do, the more we can game out and visualize all of the possible outcomes and scenarios that we are going to be walking into, the better prepared we are, the better we are able to enact our plans and keep people safe. My Indivisible chapter has a wonderfully organized safety team, and the depth of experience and wisdom that people bring to that team. We are constantly preparing. We're debriefing after events. We're strategizing. We are spending weeks planning ahead of each protest. We are teaching our safety team members de-escalation skills. We are making sure that we have medics staffed for our events. I really appreciated this line from the training materials from the weekend. Safety measures like training participants, deploying marshals, practicing de-escalation, and preparing for risks are not merely supplemental precautions, they are the backbone of nonviolent discipline. Protecting yourself and those around you is part of what makes nonviolence powerful. Please come back for the next video because I want to talk about the 4 core principles of nonviolence. And then over the next several videos over the next couple of days, I have so much to share.